So I got a chuckle the other morning. I got a call after sending out my morning video from one of the general managers that I work with. And he said to me, I got your video this morning. It reminded me of the show I'm watching called Alone. And he says, you remind me of one of the guys on the show. Now, I hadn't seen the show, so I was intrigued, and I started to watch the show because he explained it as this. There's 10 guys who are dropped off in 10 different locations, so they're not connected with each other. In fact, they're alone, and that's why the show is called Alone. But they're dropped off in this northern part of British Columbia, where it is wilderness, and all they have is forest and ocean and rain. Now, I happen to be from British Columbia originally, so I can relate to a lot of that. And that's one of the reasons why I moved away from British Columbia, or I'm pleased that we moved away from British Columbia, because of the amount of rain. There's 220 days of rain in that particular area. Now, I didn't live in that particular area, but in the Vancouver area. This happens to be a few hundred miles away from Vancouver. But here's the point, I digress. In this situation, you got 10 guys that are dropped off individually, and the directions they're given is that they need to survive as long as they possibly can. They don't know what's happening with any of the other guys. All they know is when they are alerted at the end that the 9th person has dropped out, that they're the winner and they get $500,000. But up until that point, they don't know whether there's 8 guys left, 2 guys left, or whatever the situation is. And so they're left to their own vices. Here's the point of what I want to get at today, because I contrasted the Endeavour mission, SpaceX and NASA sending astronauts to the International Space Station, versus these guys that are all alone. And when you watch the All Alone, and the guys share, because there's no camera crew there, they're given 4 cameras each to document their own story, their own experiences while they're alone. It is amazing how even after a few days, they start to lose hope. Now, initially, they're fighting for survival. And this is kind of what I want to get at here, is there's things that we need for us to be at our best. How do we be at our best? Not just when we're trying to survive, but when we're in our personal lives, when we're at work, no matter what we're doing. How do we survive as individuals? How do we survive as organizations? How do we survive as a world? And there's this basic thing of survival. Everybody gets that. Nothing else matters when you're contending for survival. But after you know that you're going to survive, it comes down to basic needs and wants. But one of those basic things is this concept of connection. And how do we connect with other people? And that's why it is hard. It is hard for me right now, being isolated and separated from those that I'm used to working with. Now, the cool thing is I have my wife here, and because we have a great connection, a great relationship, and we're able to see our family and things, it's good. But at the same time, it's not the way it should be as far as being separated from each other in this thing called social distancing. It is hard, and that's why we feel tired and frustrated and anxious. And I was thinking about the computer the other day, and how my computer was bogging down, and I realized I had run out of RAM. RAM is what you need to be able to process all the information on a moment-by-moment basis. And I only had 8 megs of RAM, and I was constantly operating in that 6, 7, 8 range. And so it was churning in a very small space, where the rest of it was all used up by all of these other things. And so it's like your brain, when you're in isolation, you're anxious, you have uncertainty, you're separated from people. You're using up so much of your brain power for unnecessary things. And so I got a new computer, which has got 16 megs of RAM, and it's just functioning great. So the point is, this is how you expand your RAM. Beyond survival and the basic needs, and money goes into, in our society, it is a form of how do we transact business. It's how we trade with each other. It's how we get other things that we can't create or acquire on our own. When we have money, we can acquire those things. But there's a point of connection. And up here, the astronauts, not only the 2 guys in in the SpaceX rocket had each other, but then there were 3 guys in the International Space Station. Now there's 5 up there, and they've got each other. There's a connection. These guys are all alone, and it doesn't take long until they lose hope. Then, once we get beyond the basic needs and connection, how do we become even greater? How do we become even more motivated? And it really comes down to 3 things, and we call them intrinsic motivators, internal motivators. One is self-direction. No question, these guys have self-direction. So do these, although it's very coordinated with NASA and SpaceX and other organizations. But in the end, there's also this element of getting better, mastery. How do we become the best that we can be with what we've got? And this is where it's fascinating to see how some of these guys are coping. And we're, I think, in the 7th episode now, and there's only 4 guys left. And what's interesting is the one guy's thinking about building a cabin. He doesn't know how long he's going to be there, but he's thinking about building a cabin. He's thinking big. While the other guys maybe create just a tarps over ropes and things like that in a very rough scenario. This other guy, he's thinking big. He's thinking beyond. He thinks, maybe I'm going to be here for months. And how do I make it so that I can survive? But it's how is he directing himself and giving himself motivation, because he's using his skills to become better. And one of the guys too created a canoe with twigs, and then he used a tarp as the bottom for it, and it worked fabulously. Just fascinating in the show to see how these guys are coping under the circumstances. But it's no different when we're in our organizations. We need all of that, including a transcending purpose, or a purpose that is bigger than ourselves. And that's why, leaders, your organization needs to be clear about why are we working together? What are we trying to accomplish? Up here, they know what they're trying to accomplish. To the International Space Station, spend time there, do research, etc., and make it back alive. When Neil Armstrong walked on the moon and said, a small step for a man, a large step for mankind, it was a huge purpose. And that's what this is all about. And so how do we as leaders help our people to see what we're doing? And if it's just to make money, sure, the last guy standing gets $500,000. But that $500,000 lessens in motivation when we're fighting with some of these other basic things. All of a sudden, money doesn't matter anymore. And here, I'm assuming they're getting paid well, but it's the mission. It's all about the mission. And when these guys think about not just the $500,000 from a money perspective, but they think about it for their family and how they're going to be able to look after their family, all the better. That's when it becomes a transcending purpose. Money is never going to motivate us beyond. Let me say that again. Money is never going to motivate us beyond. It's what that money will get for us that is the motivator. And when it's not just things, but when we do it for our families, we do it for others, that it creates this incredible motivation in us. And that's what drives us on. So think about it, leaders. Make sure that your team is clear about why we function as a team. What are we trying to accomplish beyond just making money? What is the money going to accomplish for the organization and for the team and the people that we look after? And that's where it'll make a difference to your people, and where it'll help them to get beyond all of the challenge, the anxieties, the uncertainty that we're currently facing.